Okay. All right, ladies. It's right at 7 o'clock, so we'll get started. We ended last week with the final friend, the discussion from the final friend, Zophar, who was quite possibly the youngest. Certainly by custom, he would have spoken last. He speaks the least. But we finished up and in chapter 11, at the end of chapter 11, and we're left with, in a sense, a startled and beaten Job. His friends have assessed the situation. They've repeated some of their thoughts that very possibly, in fact, Zophar, the last, really accuses Job of being sinful, and that this would have not happened had he not been who he was. And so we begin our text tonight. We're going to get through three chapters tonight. We have in these next three chapters, Job's words at the end of what we call round one, where all three friends now have spoken. Job has answered back, and now he will give his final thoughts to this first round of conversation. And Eliphaz will begin at the end of this text in chapter 15. He will begin his new thoughts. But I'm going to move fairly quickly through this text. We're going to try to get through all three chapters tonight. And part of that, the reason for that is because we've already examined some of the thoughts here. Job repeats himself. You know, we talked about Job and his life and who he was and how this would have looked. His friends have come to him to comfort him. I believe, based off of what we're told about Job, about his faith, both in the book of Hebrews and in James, that Job was known for his perseverance. It was his patience in trial and affliction that has been what has been so astounding about Job. And patience does not form and become well-defined in a week or even in a month. Or in a whole lot of years. That's right. And so I tend to think that these conversations, these friends have come to comfort Job, and that at least for months, these conversations made their rounds. And we talked about how conversations do that, how when we are with friends and when we're with family for extended periods of time, the same conversation regenerates itself over and over, especially when you're trying to figure something out, when there's a new situation for the family and the friends to figure out. And so I think that that's very definitely what is happening here. I don't think that, that Eliphaz talked and then Job talked and then Bildad talked and then Job talked and then Zophar talked and the rounds. I think it's written in the way that it is. I think either Job possibly wrote the book himself. And if he did, of his own experience, because certainly we know that he outlives this affliction, and he is also granted a full life after this. And as we know from our own experiences, when someone has an experience that's overwhelming and that is quite amazing, they may write that, but we don't know that. We don't know who wrote it. There are ideas of even Ezra being one who would have recorded the story, that it would have been carried on through oral traditions until late in the manuscripts of the Old Testament. But anyway, all right. And so we're going to start by looking at this first piece of Job 12, verses 1 through 5. Then Job answered and said, "No doubt you are the people, and wisdom will die with you. But I have understanding as well as you. I'm not inferior to you. Indeed, who does not know such things as these? I am one mocked by his friends, who called on God and he answered him. The just and the blameless who is ridiculed. A lamp is despised in the thought of one who is at ease. It is made ready for those whose feet slip." And so we really have 3 points in this chapter of chapter 12. He makes 3 points. Again, he reproves his friends. He corrects them. He He tells them to back down. He talks about how the wicked often prosper, that while that may be a general truth, it is certainly not a specific truth. And he also speaks then of the wisdom and power of God. He begins by stating that he senses that they're conceited and that they're confident in their own wisdom. This is sort of a sarcastic thing. No doubt you are the people. I mean, it's kind of like we say, well, aren't you the big guy? You know, coming in here and telling me what's what. And that's really what he's saying. They have had this mighty fine opinion of themselves and of their wisdom in comparison to him. That's really who they've compared themselves with. I mean, they're bestowing him with their knowledge and their wisdom. And he says, do you think that you are the only ones who understand with wisdom? Do you think you're the only ones? You know, before this happened to Job, Job certainly was at least as honorable in society as these three men were. He says, do you think you are the only one? And he speaks of the irony in a sense. In a sense, this is sarcastic. They seem to feel that they are fit to dictate and give law and judgment for all mankind. And they have set their standard for all, and that all that wisdom is not possibly available for everybody else. That's really what he says here. You're the only one, because he says, in fact, if you die, it's going to be gone forever. And wisdom will die with you. You're the only ones that's got any. What are we going to do when you pass away? I mean, you know, what are we going to do, and who are we going to count on? And that's what he says here, isn't it? Yeah, he says, you underestimate me. I have a brain too. I know the same things you know about God. I perceive the same things about life that you perceive. You have no more experience than I have with life itself. Now, we've already talked about how already they've noted that they don't live as long a generations as men used to. And remember, we noted that if you look before the flood, men lived, 6, 7, 8, 900 years, almost 1,000. But in their generations, if he were to have lived at the time of Abraham, which is probably generally around those years, there would not have been as long a lifespans. But he says, I have a brain just as good as yours. And we must be careful in assuming that we have better wisdom concerning another situation than they do. And we are apt to do that sometimes. We'll jump in and say, well, they should do this, or they should do that, or we should say this, or we should say that. And so we've talked about this before in this class, because this is not the first time that's noted, that we need to be careful in giving our advice. These men had no possible way to understand everything Job had gone through. No way. And he says that, remember the first time he talks to Eliphaz, he says, you have no idea. There are not even words for me to tell you how bad things are for me. And so we need to understand that. He says that they treated him unfairly. And he says, you treat me as if you hate me. That's what those words are, that you treat me with contempt and mocking, laughing over his affliction and tragedy. He almost seems to think that they're in jest. But he says, okay, that's fine. You do whatever you need to do. You mock me. You say whatever things you want to say, and whatever telling me you've got wisdom. However, I will rely on God. That's fine. You say whatever you need to say. I have God that I can go to. I've poured my tears out before him. And even if you were to condemn me, God knows my integrity and my heart. And I will tell you, that gives him solace. It does not matter what men think. It only matters what God knows. It doesn't matter what men think. It only matters what God knows. And when we are in a situation where we feel like we have been misevaluated and misunderstood, and that our actions are questioned, and that possibly even people are talking about us, it's one of the things that I have heard through the years from particularly young women worry about what other people say and think about them. And I used to tell the young women at Annandale, I assure you, nobody's thinking about you. I have not got time to think about what I have to think about, much less think about somebody else. I can't figure myself out. I'm not sitting trying to figure somebody else out. But we overestimate that. And what Job did is said, it doesn't matter what you say. It matters what God knows about me. He suspected that they hated him because he had fallen into poverty. The just and the blameless who is ridiculed, a lamp This is one who has light, who has honor, who has respect, is despised in the thought of those who are at ease. It's made ready for those whose feet slip. In other words, one of the other translations talks about a man who loses all is despised by those who do not. He implies that even a most just man can come under contempt if he falls into misfortune and position, especially these three who were rich and full and at ease and merry for themselves. They were where he used to be. Now that he's lost everything, they had not a lot of regard for him. They were worried about him. You need to fix yourself. But now they were better than him. They were all of a sudden, better, so much better than him that they could judge him, that they looked scornfully upon him, Job says. And you know, this happens all the time to folks. People are powerful and they're at their top of their popularity and something terrible happens to them and they lose everybody because there is no more respect and no more adulation. You know, people like to be around powerful and lovely and beautiful and rich and successful people. And all of a sudden, Job says, I've lost everything. And now you have disregarded me. You've been thoughtless. You hit a bad time. You become too cumbersome and inconvenient for those who everything is going right for. We don't have time anymore. We don't want to deal with this. This is hard. This is not something that we feel that we want to deal with. And that's what he has said in that beginning open statement. The tents of robbers prosper, it says, as we continue on in verse 6. And those who provoke God are secure in what God provides by his hand. But now ask the beast, and they'll teach you. And the birds of the air, and they'll tell you. Ask the birds of the air, they'll tell you, or speak to the earth, and it will teach you. And the fish of the sea, they'll explain it to you. Who among all of these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In whose hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of all mankind? Does not the ear test words and the mouth test its food? Job just simply appeals to facts now. He says, I don't need you to approve of me. You have hated me and left me. Now that I've fallen upon a bad time, you despise me. I have a God who knows me. You don't know me. I don't have to have you know me. And now he turns and he says, here's the facts, guys. The worst robbers, the meanest women, the vainest men, the oppressors of all often prosper. That's truth. That's fact. I mean, you know, this is what came to my mind immediately. I don't know why. Maybe I live in Disneyland too much, but pirates, they have treasures, man. You ever think about that? The worst of all kinds, and they're laying up, I mean, they're sitting up on their treasures. I don't know if that's true or not, but it seems like it is. And mean women can win arguments, and they can have praise from others. And vain and arrogant men do have power and are successful. We know this. Job says, this is true. We know this. So what you've said about me cannot be so. You know, it's not true that just the good prosper. He says, life itself tells us that is not true. Look at the beast to tell you, he says, just look at the beast. They're going to teach you that nature allows the greater to devour the less. Is that fair? I mean, is that fair? Look at the beast. They'll teach us something. This is God who's ruling this. Creatures have been designed and function as God has planned and has directed. The lamb does not go out to look for the wolf to lay down with at night. That is not true. They do not. And not only that, they know the order because God's hand is in it all. Creation does not question God about the fairness of the way things are in the order of things. And men, they are the ultimate in God's way of justice. Just ask the animals who are eaten by wicked men. I mean, ask an animal. Ask the birds of the air. They'll tell you about it. They'll tell you about what's fair and what isn't fair. It's hard to understand that life is not fair. But just ask the animals. who get eaten by each other and by men and by women. And yet they know that that is the order of God. And we learn from them that God governs everything. That's what we learn by looking at nature. God's got it. He's got it. He's in control. It may not be the rules we make. I mean, I find it fascinating that we can protect the sea turtles so that they can get into the sea and be eaten by the sharks. I mean, there's an order to things. It's ridiculous the way we act. And so I think that we have to get our heads around this, right? And we learn that God is in control. And it's not always fair in the eyes of men and women. We know well that God is refining it and actually making Job much wiser. He is actually doing well for Job by allowing him his affliction. He's teaching Job who he is and who Job is in relation to him. And Job will be better. And he will be fuller in his understanding of who God is and who he is in the relation to all. And all this that's happening to Job is going to be seen as righteous and good because it is God's order of things. Let us then, as the animals, ask them. They depend upon his support. Who feeds the animals? He does. Who makes sure that some lion out in the wilderness can get his prey? Who makes sure that those mountain lions, who makes sure that the ones that are out in the middle of nowhere get rained upon and fed and have food and are able to live? God does that. And they depend upon him for their support. And they lie at his mercy and they follow his direction. That is what the animals do. They totally depend on the system that God has deemed right. While it doesn't seem fair to us, just ask them. They fall into line with the order of things, Job says. That's what nature does. Give me the liberty to judge for myself. Let me then use my eyes and my ears to judge what God is doing here. If we continue on, he says, wisdom is with aged men, and with length of days, understanding. With him are wisdom and strength. He has counsel and understanding. If he breaks a thing down, it cannot be rebuilt. If he imprisons man, there can be no release. If he withholds the waters, they dry up. If he sends them out, they overwhelm the earth. With him are strength and prudence. The deceived and the deceiver are his. He leads counselors away plundered, makes fools out of judges. He loosens the bonds of kings, binds their race with a belt, and leads princes away plundered, and overthrows the mighty. Now for a noble discourse of Job concerning the wisdom and power and sovereignty of God in ordering all of the affairs of the children of men, according to his own will and in authority that no one can resist. We all agree. Job urges them to see, yes, they and him should not really be in controversy if they all believe so well the sovereignty of God. There should be no controversy. If God controls all of this and all the order is right, and the animals we can learn from that God, it's not always that the best animals are eaten. Sometimes the little sweet and vulnerable ones are. Job seems calm in this text. He just speaks concerning the things that he is certain of in a world that is drowning him in uncertainties. So what are we certain of when the world is drowning us in uncertainties? When we have tragedies, when we have losses, when we have financial burdens, when we have loss of or betrayal of friends, when we have hardships, when we find life hard. We have responsibilities that take over our lives, and they're hard responsibilities. So where do we put God in all of that? You know, the one thing Job says, the four of us should be but should depend upon in our conversation is that God is in control. That's what we all agree about. If we really do, how can you judge me? How can you judge me? Go on and let's go on and read the rest of this passage. And I'm going to go back and cover the whole thing. He deprives the trusted ones of speech. He takes away the discernment of the elders. He pours contempt on princes and disarms the mighty. He covers deep things out of darkness and brings the shadow of death to light. He makes nations great and destroys them. He enlarges nations and guides them. He takes away the understanding of the chiefs of the people of the earth and makes them wander in the pathless wilderness. They grope in the dark without light. He makes them stagger like a drunken man. These are leaders that he's doing this to. You think we can't see this in the world? Already Job knew this. You know, it is fascinating to think that we somehow think, oh, it's worse than it's ever been. Oh, it's made. And this is Job. This is probably from the time of Abraham, and he's already seen these things happen. Whole nations and cities who have been destroyed, kings that have been taken away and their territories plundered, taken away captive. He says there are some who have wisdom. If you go back to that last passage that we looked at, he says some men have wisdom, a few, those who are blessed with the length of days, who get it by experiences and the ability to learn. Did you know some people don't seem to have the ability to learn because they don't want to? It's a choice whether or not we learn. Did you know wisdom is a choice? We can pray for wisdom. We can ask God of wisdom. We can study his words for wisdom. We can meditate on his word for wisdom. We can listen to wonderful sermons and get wisdom, or we can spend our time and our lives and all the years of our days getting all kinds of information from all different outlets and never be wise. But he says, you have an advantage with length of days. With God, there is both wisdom and strength, he says. God does not need time. He doesn't need a length of days to have understanding. Did you know God doesn't have to wait to be wise? He doesn't have to learn, does he? God doesn't have to learn. He doesn't get wisdom and counsel the way that we do. He does not have to experience and observe. He is wisdom. What we observe, he has created. What we see, is his pattern and his order of things. He does not have to experience. What is wisdom of even the oldest and best compared to God? So he says, okay, maybe some men are wise. Maybe if you get old enough and you've experienced enough and you've had the ability, the desire to learn and to know and to be wise, that is just how badly you want it. How badly do you want to be wise? Now, I'm not talking about be a person that can walk around and be great at Trivial Pursuit. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about somebody that can spit out facts. I'm talking about wisdom, application of God's word in your life. Wisdom to live by, wisdom to give others, wisdom that is a light. God doesn't have to look for that wisdom. He is the wisdom. We have to look for that. So, what is the wisdom of even those who live long days and know much? I've known a lot of people that I thought were really smart and really wise in the word of God. And that is wonderful. And they are. But it's nothing in comparison to what God is. And so he takes away and nobody can dispute or change things. He does whatever he wants. What he says is, what he wills will be. That's God. That's not us. The judges, the princes, the mighty, he uses them as he sees best. They have no control, really. You remember 150 years before Cyrus, he said, I'm going to pull up Cyrus and he's going to go in and he's going to free the captives from Babylon after 70 years. You know, I studied about Cyrus. Cyrus was from this little teeny tiny city, actually. Kind of a little city on the opposite side of Greece. Nobody even knew his family existed at the time of the prophecy. And nobody, even within 20 to 30 years of him actually rising up and becoming something, would have ever even noticed him. It is incredible to think about Cyrus. And God said, oh, and so I'm going to use this guy over here. And he's going to come in and he's going to, and that prediction would have been almost too hard to even imagine. But what he says is, and what he wills will be. And nobody can undo that. And he holds all creation in his hand. If he destroys a city, Job says, and wishes that it not be rebuilt, it will not be. Sodom and Gomorrah was never rebuilt. Babylon was never rebuilt. Jerusalem has never been rebuilt. Not the way that it was. If he desires that a city comes down and never goes back up again, it will not. I don't know if you remember, but years ago, I don't know how many years ago, there was talk about Babylon, that there's not a Babylon anymore, and there's not. And God said there would never be a Babylon. And they were talking about rebuilding Babylon. And I thought, well, it's not going to happen. I don't know why everybody's so worried about it. I mean, all you have to do is know what God has already said. And what he says is true and right. You think about the Tower of Babel. We talked about that last week. He said, no, these guys got it wrong. They've got it wrong. And he destroyed, and he made the people not be able to even talk to each other so that they would scatter and do what it was that he needed done. He uses all of his children for his means, managing his children, serving the need as needed, overruling all their counsels, overpowering all their attempts, and overcoming their opposition. He is all strength and all wisdom, not because somebody has made him that, but because he is. And he sees all, even those who are weak and unwise, and even those who deceive. He knows the deceivers. He knows the deceivers, it says. He doesn't have to uncover something. He doesn't have to have some evidence that's shown to him. All of a sudden he says, oh, wow, my goodness, I didn't know they did that. He doesn't have to have that. He is interested and active among the kings and the nations. This is a good lesson for us in America right now. This lesson will be listened to by others. It may not be it's probably a good lesson for everybody. But God notes and he interferes when he wishes, controlling states and kingdoms. And if he can toss and turn and overthrow and use the great, Isaiah says, it is like a ball. He takes a kingdom and he uses it and he bounces it around as if it's a ball if he wants to. Or a king or a ruler. It's like a play toy to him. And we somehow think that we have some kind of control. How much more can he interfere with those like Job and like us? We think he doesn't have the power to intervene for us. When he can take a nation or a ruler or a king and bounce it around as if it was a ball, Isaiah says. He speaks of great kings and rulers living high on the hog, who are taken and plundered and captive to others. Matthew Henry says, their crowns quickly drop from their heads immediately to their waist, becoming belts to gird their loins, a badge of servitude. I thought that was a good description. Already Job had witnessed such. When we began to think we have control over what will happen in a nation, to men, they are gods. To men, leaders and rulers and kings and princes are like gods, but to God, our Lord God Almighty, they are men. And he can pick a man up and move him. Even the older and the wiser can fail in their judgments and counselings. He leads counselors away being plundered, blind to truths, willing to speak with incomplete knowledge. We have to be very careful. He deprives the trusted ones of speech. I mean, he can take a ruler who is a great orator and make them not a great orator, or make them say foolish things. He allows those in powers and those who depend upon words to be great to stumble and to falter on their own words. Rulers and leaders make fools of themselves as they use words that do not make sense and are not justified. And that's what Job is saying here. Plots to do evil. He uncovers them. He doesn't have to seek and find them. He is aware of them. They are not covered from him, and he can expose and unhinge them. Kingdoms ebb and flow, and they wax and they wane. God is controlling. And everything is for his people on earth. It's for his children. If he does something with a nation, it is to teach those to come back to him. It is for the good of his children. Everything he does is for those who love him. Even if it's punishment, even if it's afflictions we suffer, he is doing it for us. And so we must know that, and we must believe that. He can take away any wisdom and let them fall. He can make them grow, make them stronger. The leaders, the rulers, the great in the land will say, what happened? The fools, he loosens them. He takes them away. They don't know what's happened. What's happened to us? What is happening here? They have no idea because he makes them dumb. They have no understanding. He makes them wander around searching for something to bring back that strength, to bring that strength and wisdom. Here's where it says they grope in the dark. They don't know what's happened to them. Makes them wander in the pathless darkness. They don't have any idea what's destroying their nations. You think this doesn't apply today? It's always applied. It applied in the Babylonian kingdom when he said Cyrus will come up and the Babylonians are going to be taken over, and the Medes, these people named the Medes, and the Medes and the Persians are going to get together, and people thought, what? That can't happen. That can't happen, that the Medes and the Persians get together. I mean, they fought each other that can't happen. That did happen. They came straight in the center of Babylon one drunken night, cut off the water supplies, and took Babylon. And God had already said it was going to happen. And then the Greeks. I mean, this little fella, Alexander the Great, by the way, Philip of Macedon's son. Macedonia was nothing. The Greeks looked down on Macedonia. That's who Alexander the Great was. You just think about it, guys. And a lot of people have read The Fall of the Roman Empire. God does whatever he wants to do. And the leaders and the rulers don't understand it. He makes them wander around searching for something to bring back the strength and the wisdom and the power, but they have no way because God is in control and they lack understanding. And when we cast a vote, if we so choose to do, I don't think you necessarily have to, may we understand that God is king forever and that Jesus, our Lord, is given rule and that God is watching over his children. Job 13, 1 through 12. Behold, my eye has seen all this. My ear has heard and understood it. What you know, I also know. I'm not inferior to you, but I will speak to the Almighty, and I desire to reason with God. You are forgers of lies. You are all worthless physicians. Oh, that you would be silent, and it would be your wisdom. Now hear my reasoning. Heed my pleadings from my lips. Will you speak wickedly for God and talk deceitfully for him? Will you show partiality for him? Will you contend for God? You speaking for God? That's what you're doing? You want to do that? Well, will it be well when he searches you out? Or can you mock him as you mock a man? He will surely rebuke you if you secretly show partiality. Will not his excellence make you afraid and dread of him fall upon you? Your platitudes are proverbs of ashes, and your defenses are defenses of clay. Now, a little bit more frustrated tone. Job's ramping up a little bit. He's more bold here. I'm sure in the course of these conversations, he gets pretty crazy. I would. And I'm sure he does. He is really dealing with some thoughts here, isn't he? He's bold. He's going to make application to the words from his previous chapter. If God is in control, and if even nature can tell us that life is not always fair, and that it is not always those who are the best who prosper, those who are the most righteous who prosper, that sometimes the most wicked, the most mean, the most ungodly prosper, he will warmly express his resentment of the unkindness of his friends. He says he doesn't need them to explain what he already knows. I have confirmed that I have seen and heard the same truths as you know, and you know that I know what you know. That's basically what he says. I mean, come on, guys. He then turns to God because talking to them was just like talking to himself, right? I mean, what good does it do for us to talk to ourselves when we know nothing? We're just talking. It reminds me of the man who in the parable of Jesus, and I'm off the subject now, but I do think about this a lot, the publican and the sinner. The publican did not even need God to be present, because his whole entire prayer was him talking to himself. He was telling himself how great he was. And so a very unwise, undiscerning, stupid fella was praying about himself to himself, about how great he was, and that he was glad that he wasn't the other fella. I mean, just glad that I'm not him. He didn't need God to be there for his prayer. And so Job says, there's no sense talking to you. You don't know anything I don't know. I wish I had the liberty to talk to God and to reason with him, he says. He has understanding, and you don't. He would not be so hard on me. It is true that when everyone is against us and has misjudged us in our intentions, that there is comfort for us to have God hear us, to listen to us, to watch over us. It is wonderful to be able to get on our knees and pray when we feel that nobody understands us, or that when we feel we're alone, or that we're the only ones battling, or we're the only ones in a certain situation to listen to us and to watch over us. It is words that we can surely identify with. God was all Job had left. He was his only hope. And I will tell you that that is a powerful and important thing for all of us, because he's our only hope. He is our only hope. And this life will eat us up. It is not going to necessarily be fair to us. We will be betrayed and have losses. And without God, there is no way to make our way through this. They have been unjust. They have been unloving in all ways. He says, you're liars. He calls them liars here, doesn't he? He says, you're forgers of lies. You're liars, accusing me unjustly. You have framed me. You have misrepresented me. Coming to cure, you have wounded and broken my heart with every word you've said. He begs them to be silent. He asked that he can be more patient with his words. I think you would be more wise if you stopped talking as well. Better to just stop talking. Everybody just needs to quit talking. You ever been in a situation like that where you think, okay, I think everybody just needs to be quiet? We're not accomplishing much, and we are backtracking quickly. You have spoken for God, he says. You have valued your own words and your wisdom above God's. Will you, who are so weak and so passionate, lift yourselves high enough to speak for God? Really? That's what he's saying. You gonna speak for God? You're worthless physicians. Oh, that you should just be silent. Will you speak wickedly for God? You gonna do that? You've put words into God's mouth. How dare you? Who does that? And your good intentions will not justify your actions. And he doesn't need your help. In fact, you do not serve him well at all. You ever been around somebody that said, well, I just did that for their own good? And I think, well, it doesn't seem like it did that. And I'm not sure it's even right. I'm not sure what you said was even right. You may want to consider the greatness and the nature of God who you have ventured to represent, he says. You may serve yourself well to not speak for God. Aren't you afraid to speak for him? He says, aren't you afraid? You know, I mean, don't you dread him if he falls upon you? Aren't you afraid of him? Doesn't it bother you that you mock him by assuming you understand him? Consider yourselves, he says. You are an unequal match for the greatness of God. Your platitudes are worthless and weak and easily trampled on and blown away. Your bodies, your defenses, this bottom section here, your defenses, your bodies are like clay. They can be crushed, they can be buried, they can be forgotten. No better than dust. Your arguments are a heap of dirt. And then he goes on in verse 13 to say, hold your peace with me and let me speak. Then let come on me what may. Why do I take my flesh in my teeth and put my life in my hands? Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. That's my favorite line in here. Though I am afflicted, even if he allows it, yet I will trust in him. Even so, I will defend my own ways before him. He also shall be my salvation, for a hypocrite cannot come before him. Listen carefully to my speech and to my declaration with your ears. See now, I have prepared my case. I know that I shall be vindicated. Who is he who will contend with me? If now I hold my tongue, I perish. Only two things do not do to me. Then I will not hide myself from you. Withdraw your hand far from me, and let not the dread of you make me afraid. Then call, and I will answer, or let me speak. Then you respond to me. Job here will take a fresh and fast hold on his integrity. So he seems resolved to not let this go. He is not going to give in. He's going to continue to trust in God and know that God knows his integrity. He asked his friends and any other interested party to just leave him alone. Let me just be by myself and quit interjecting silly thoughts. Quit telling me what you think. Quit speaking for God when you don't know God's thoughts on this. You don't know my heart. Me and God are the only ones who know my heart. I will ask God to answer, not you. Then I will be dealt with fairly. Even if consequences come, he will deal fairly, not like you have done. While transgression is always present, he stays confident in his heart and his upright behavior. You know, I've had a lot of conversations with people about, well, I'm afraid to say when I get to heaven, or I'm going to heaven and I know I'll be there. And I don't know what confidence and the hope we have if we can't say that we plan to be there. I plan to be there. I don't think that's arrogant of me. I'm not going to be there on my own right. I'm going to be there because God, through his grace and his mercy, have provided a way. And Job knew his behavior was righteous. He knew he wasn't perfect. He had already said that over and over and over again, at least 3 times. He said, I'm not perfect. I know there are transgressions. Show me if there's a transgression I don't know about. Teach me each and every transgression, and I will straighten my way. Which is what, if you read the Psalms over and over, show me the way, cleanse my heart, created me a new spirit. I mean, that's what we pray for. Show me who I am. Let me see it, as painful as it is, even if consequences come. While transgressions are always there, he says, I feel confident in you and in my behavior. Those who are upright and have the assurance that their righteousness is due to God's grace can cheerfully look forward to meeting their Creator. Come what may, I trust more in him than you. That's what he says. Though he slay me, though he is in control of my situation at present, I trust him, not you. And Job says, my pain is so severe, I can but wonder why God has allowed the intensity of my affliction. I am ready to not just rend my clothes, but to tear my flesh off with my teeth, he says. I am in such, it's just, all I can do to stand what I'm going through. So great was his affliction. Who would understand but God? I can't trust you to know my struggle, he says. Wounded and broken was he. It's God who provides that comfort. And I remain confident in him, he says. He will provide justification and salvation. He depended on God because he was confident that he was not a faker. He was not a hypocrite. I am not a hypocrite. I am not a faker. I believe in him. I cling to him. I love him. I obey him. I want what is best. God knew also. And Job constantly depends on him, never forgetting, even in tribulation, though he slay me, yet I trust him. A determined and unrelenting faith is displayed in clear view. Whatever was happening, Job was satisfied that God still remained worthy of all trust. And I will tell you, you will face something in your life that you have to be that person and say, I don't understand this. I can't even take it in. My brain can't even compute what has happened. And yet the one thing I know is that God is in control and he loves me and he's watching. And that is what he said. No, I don't want to plead some case to you. You are useless, Job says, but I will plead before God with confidence, and he will be just. Withdraw your hand from me, for I am useless without you. Let not the dread of you make me afraid. Don't make me afraid of you. Make me cling to you. Make me yearn for you. Don't let me be afraid of judgment. Let me know that you are all I have, that you are my hope. Finally, in the end, we are fit for nothing, and our hope is always before us. May we beg to come before him, confident and full, but only through his love and grace. Then comes the salvation. Praise God, who sees us in our afflictions and in our weaknesses when we and others do not have a way to understand them. There is just times when nobody understands life. But we trust in God. How many are my iniquities and my sins? Make me know my transgressions and my sin. Why do you hide your face and regard me as your enemy? Will you frighten a leaf driven to and fro, and will you pursue dry stubble? For you write bitter things against me, and you make me inherit the iniquities of my youth. You put my feet in stocks and watch closely all my paths. You set a limit for the soles of my feet. Men decays like a rotten thing, like a garment that is moth-eaten. Please help me know my sins. I beg you to give me understanding and particulars concerning what I have done to sin against you. His friends have indicated that there are so many sins, surely much worse than he had ever imagined. So Job asked God just to deal with him. What I don't know, tell me, show me, like we had just talked about. What's required of all of us? And it's so painful. You know, reading the Bible is open heart surgery. That's what it is. It's as simple as that. It is open heart surgery. And if we read the Bible and the entire time we are fighting a right fight and saying, they need to know this, and they need to know this, and they need to know this, we have missed the medical application of the book for our hearts and our minds. We must deal with it. Let me see truly who I am so that I can be better. Why have you withdrawn from me? I think he says this not just because of the physical loss and the fleshly pain, but because his soul was hungry and thirsty and not being filled. He did not understand the spiritual application of what was happening to him. What was he to do? What was he to do when God did not seem to be near? The favors of the Almighty were hidden. He could see no good, no answer, no escape, no mercy. All the blessings of God's presence were gone. Therefore, I assume that I am like your enemy and I can't stand before you, is the words he uses. I am as pitiful as a leaf, no power at all. I'm just blowing about in the wind, and somebody can come along and just step on me and I'll crack and go with the wind. And that's what he says here. It's just as if I'm a leaf floating around. Thank you. And somebody can crush and break me. And while my afflictions are for sins, if that is the case, it is still a bitter pill to swallow. Even if this is all about something I've done, this is still hard, he says. That somehow suddenly severe punishment has come upon me, maybe for sins of my youth. Is it because I did something a long time ago? Can you please forgive me of my sins of my youth and forget those things? Yes, all of us sing that song loud and clear. Remember not the sins of my youth. My goodness, don't we all say that? And he says, so even if you're pulling things from a long time ago, this is still hard for me to understand. Long since committed and repented for and forgiven for, is now your wrath come on me for that? With deliberate and determined will. You write bitter things. He says, this is your story. You write bitter things against me. It's as if God is writing a story of Job. And he says, this is bitter. And you're just writing a story. This is your story, God. I don't know this story. Job had no knowledge of it. Isn't it interesting he was? Isn't it interesting that he had had a conversation with Satan? He knew exactly what was happening. Isn't it interesting that this was a story God was writing? Afflicting and putting my feet in stocks to bring shame and expose me, watching me to catch me in any step from past, present, future, is that's what's happening here. I can do no good due to your judgment. I am corrupting, wasting away under a heavy hand of God, we at best wear out fast. You know, even the healthiest people in life wear out fast. He says, under God's rebuke, it is exceptionally fast. Job has already mentioned how I don't expect to live much longer. I'm in such a terrible state. I mean, he had sores all over him. He was weak. He couldn't eat. He couldn't hold anything down on his stomach. He expected to die. And he said, at best, man goes fast. We've talked about this. Under God's rebuke, they go exceptionally fast. We cannot depend upon our flesh to save us from the trials of life. They have so little stability. And then he says, man who is born of woman is few days and full of trouble. So my dad used to tell a joke about Job, and he'd say, you know, they say, talking about, are you born with sin? You know, a lot of people believe that you're born with sin. And he said, well, I don't know. If we go to Job, he says a man who is born of women is a few days and full of trouble. And in chapter 3, he says he cursed the day that he was born. It's a joke. Anyway, you know, in chapter 3, he said he cursed the day he was born because he didn't want the day to be. Anyway, it's a joke. I thought it was pretty funny. Man who is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. He comes forth like a flower and fades away. He flees like a shadow and does not continue. And do you open your eyes on such a one and bring me to judgment with yourself? Who can bring a clean thing out of an unclean? No one. Since his days are determined, the number of his months is with you. You have appointed his limits, so he cannot pass. Look away from him that he may rest, till like a hired man he finishes his day. So continuing with his thought of life, he speaks about how short it is. It is measured by birth. So the beginning of the recording of your life is at birth. We're not talking about, you know, if a baby is a child at conception, all that. But the recording of your birth is, the recording of your birth is the beginning of your days. Immediately trouble. Some die immediately, and he's already considered stillbirth, and some will die right after death. But to all, we begin to feel pain. We begin to die in discomfort. We are met with worries and concerns. Even as children, we fear, we fall, we feel pain, we feel loss, we know sorrow. No day passes in your entire life without some form of toiling, grieving, fretting, fear. Something always happens in a day. That's true. That's a truth. No day passes. There is some form of hurry, frustration, disorder in each day. Now, I'm not saying you're unhappy. I'm not saying that we're walking around moping all the time, or because I think that Christians have to be happy, but days don't always work exactly how we plan them. And Russ can tell you, I'm like a locomotive. I get myself on a track every morning, and I will plow over you if you get in my way. And if something goes off and my track is disengaged somehow, it really throws me for a loop. It's hard. And so all of us understand this, that it doesn't take but a few days to already cry when you're hungry, or to know that you're in pain, or your stomach hurts, and so no day really comes. But when we get to heaven, so the wearisomeness of life, right? Life is wearisome. It is. In comparison to heaven. When we get to heaven, our days will be many. They will be forever. They will be perfect. They will be free from trouble. But for now, Job had to rely on faith, hope, and love, which is what we rely on to balance. And he was finding that a challenge in his present condition. We're fragile as flowers, he says. A shadow that comes and leaves quickly, lost in the nighttime. You ever sit under a tree? In India, it's interesting because we used to ride the trains in India, and there are massive amounts of people. There's a lot of people in India. And if there'd be a tree or two in a field, you know, where workers were, you could get there at noonday and they'd all be underneath the tree. All of them packed in there, you know, even body heat was better than the sun. So they'd all be packed underneath the tree. And if we'd come back by them in about 3 hours, they'd all be on the other side of the tree. because the shade, the shadow, but a shadow comes and goes, doesn't it? You can't depend upon a shadow to be there forever because it comes and goes with the sun every day. Flowers. I mean, our loved ones bring us flowers, or somebody will send you flowers, or we plant flowers. That's the hardest part for me, is the planting of the flowers. I plant the flowers, I water, I water, I water. I'm very patient with them. I love my flowers, but eventually they die on me. It's a real frustration. I start seeing the first brown ones and I think, you know, it's just, they're not going to be forever. That's what he's talking about. The frailty of life. And so we have no confidence in the long life of a flower or a shadow. We don't grow flowers expecting their beauty beyond a season. We know that shadows pass quickly. But you, God, you are mindful of such a frail one. You bring cleansing to a corruptible sinner. Man cannot within himself do that. You are the carer of those things. So since our days are determined, our life will come to an end, and God can allow or not allow our days to continue. Our time on earth is at the disposal of his power. Nothing happens by chance. Powers of nature depend upon him. So I think people die naturally of disease and of accidents. I don't think God is in control of every car accident, or I don't believe that, or our bodies are susceptible to disease. Disease is here because of Satan. We can catch something, we can get sick, we can die, but God controls the powers of nature that provide us with life and death. We depend on him. Governments are in his control. Diseases are his servants. There is no chance when his will intervenes. And since trouble, trials, weaknesses are from the start of our lives, how will you bring me into judgment? Worthless and poor, afflicted and gross? He begs for reprieve, to rest for a while, until the appointed day for me to die. My life at best is a day of a hireling, a day of toil and labor. Did you know that's what our lives are? Our lives are about getting up every day and being productive and working and having a purpose, and then going to bed and getting our rest so that the next day we can get up to fulfill our purpose that God has for us. It is our toil. We are hirelings. We are hired men. That's what we are. And we get up each day understanding that it is a toil and a labor that we love because there is purpose and that God is watching. My life at best is that. I am content to accomplish that. And I will try to make the best of my troubles and my common hardships. He knows his hardships are no different than anybody else. Everybody wakes up to trouble just a few days old. And so we know that. Remind me, he says, that this is all men's lot, and that all will retire and be let go. Everybody is going to have their day where they work and they toil and they work and they toil, and then they'll retire, or they'll be let go. We can be fired from our job. Life is labor and toil, but hardship will end when the day passes. All right, I'm going to have to stop there because it's 8 o'clock. I will start at the end of this text, chapter 14. We'll finish chapter 14, and then we'll get into the next part of Eliphaz conversation. I don't know what I'm going to do about next week. Right now I plan to do our class next week. I'll send a message out. We do have a lot going on right now, and so I could have to cancel next week, but I'll let everybody know if I do have to. Let me stop the recording here.